With no pay deal in sight, this week's nursing strikes are set to go ahead on Wednesday and Thursday, and the Royal College of Nurses have also announced new strike dates for February. It will all be disruptive, even if wholly justified, and 2 reports over the weekend have given us an idea of who exactly is to blame. The Observer reported this. The Health and Social Care Secretary, Steve Barclay, has privately urged trade unions to help him make the case to the Treasury and Number 10 for extra money for nurses, ambulance workers and other NHS staff in an extraordinary twist to the escalating crisis over health service strikes. A serious cabinet split has opened up, with Barclay now wanting more money for all NHS staff except doctors, while Rishi Sunak and Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, are refusing to budge from their insistence that no more can be offered. The Sunday Times more squarely put the responsibility at the feet of Jeremy Hunt. So they wrote this: "It is understood that the Treasury has told Steve Barclay to find savings in his health department if he wants to give nurses a pay rise. He has resisted the idea after having to find £250 million to plough into social care to free up hospital beds and ease the accident and emergency crisis. Barclay believes nurses should be an exceptional case, but the Treasury has rebuffed his approach for more money." So they're saying if you want to pay the nurses more, it's going to have to come out of NHS budgets, which seems, that's not what the nurses are arguing for a start. They don't want this money to be coming from the already starved, capital spend that we need in the NHS. The Sunday Times go on to cite someone they term a Westminster insider, who says this: "Last year, he," so this is Jeremy Hunt, "argued for more funding for the NHS in his book Zero. Now he has become the Iron Chancellor, saying no to everything." There was a period during the pandemic, I think, when Jeremy Hunt was chair of the Health Select Committee, where I was saying, maybe he's changed. He seems like a reasonable guy. He ran the NHS into the ground when he was running the service, but maybe he's had some radical conversion. Nope, he is back in government, and once again, he is cutting essential services. Once a Tory, always a Tory. According to negotiators for the Unison trade union, Steve Barclay was asking them to help persuade Jeremy Hunt to stump up more cash for healthcare staff. Sarah Gordon of Unison said this: "He, Barclay, asked for our assistance in making the case about how improving pay and investing in the workforce could lead to greater efficiencies and productivity. He offered to be the advocate for health workers inside the cabinet. My interpretation of what he said was that he was prepared to make the case for us for investment in pay." And the Observer added this context. So they said, "Gorton, who has been involved in every pay round on behalf of Unison members in the NHS for the past 20 years, explained that in order to reach deals with Conservative governments, she had found that ministers needed to be able to convince the Treasury that any extra money spent would lead to savings in the medium and longer term." Now, this is a bit odd to me. I'm not sure why funding the NHS properly should be conditional on it saving money in the medium or the longer term. Now, I'd have thought that keeping the nation alive might be worth a bit of extra money in itself. You shouldn't have to say, if we spend this money on the NHS, that means that ultimately in 5 years' time, you'll save this money on that. Maybe we just should fund the NHS because it's a good thing. Do we really have to be bean counting all the time? No, fund the NHS because we need good healthcare, please. If that means you have to increase taxes on the rich, fantastic, fabulous. Let's do that. Let's not say the only reason we'll invest in the health service is if you can construct some argument whereby that saves the Treasury money 5 years or 10 years down the line. It just seems to have all of the priorities backwards. Now, of course, the context of the nurses' strike is an average real terms pay cut of 10% since 2020. And another group of workers who faced real terms pay cuts are teachers. The largest teaching union has now announced they, like the nurses, will be going on strike. Over 90% of teachers in England and Wales voted for strike action on turnouts above 50%, which is the legal requirement. They'll take part in a mass walkout on February the 1st, followed by 6 further days of regional action. On Sky News, the Joint General Secretary of the NEU laid out teachers' main concerns.
The biggest issue is that there is a workforce crisis in our schools, and those aren't my words. Those are the words of Amanda Spielman, the Chief Inspector of Schools. She wrote in her annual report in December 2022 that school leaders are finding it the most difficult thing for them to do is recruit and retain staff, and that this was leading, and these are her words, to a workforce crisis in schools, and children were bearing the brunt of that crisis. And it's quite interesting. I mean, I can give you all the figures about the number of teachers leaving the profession. I can tell you that the government only recruited just over half of its targets for secondary teachers this year, just recruited 61%. So we're nearly 40% short of the target for secondary teachers. But this becomes really apparent because I now have parents writing to me. And last week I had a parent contact me who said, my son is in year 11 doing GCSE chemistry. The 3 chemistry teachers in the school have left. Since September, he's been using worksheets. He's being taught by cover teachers using worksheets. How is this preparing him to take a GCSE in chemistry? And just yesterday, a parent in a primary school, her child is in year 4, her child has had 20 different supply teachers, all doing the best job they can, but no regular teacher since September. And parents up and down the land will be, when I say this, that will, many of them will have had that experience. 1 in 8 maths lessons is now taught by a non-subject specialist. So the other thing that's happening in schools, particularly secondary schools, is that there's an army of teachers doing the best job they can, but teaching out of their subject area. In some schools, it's about half the lessons some of the time when teachers are teaching out of their subject area. And however hard they work, they cannot provide the quality of education that children and young people deserve.
Dahlia, that was Mary Boosted. That was before the results of the strike action were announced, but I think the NEU had a pretty decent idea that the ballot would go their way. What do you make of this? Are the government going to be worried that so many groups of people are going on strike and that these strikes are really lasting quite a long time? It doesn't seem like workers in the public sector are willing to fold.
The government probably anticipate that this is going to happen, and I think that their strategy on how to deal with this is, again, that kind of Thatcherite model of trying to divide and rule workers, to try and turn the public against workers as if those are separable entities, to try and construct this false idea of the public whose interests are different to organised workers. What they're getting wrong, though, is that one of the key things that Thatcher did that made her attack on the unions so successful and ushered in this, shift in the economy, in the very structure of our economy, in a way that deeply weakened labour power. What she did was she essentially gave in to the demands of some unions and stigmatised and islandised other unions, namely the NUM, the National Union of Miners. Public sector pay under Margaret Thatcher was increased by about 25%. So in a weird way, they're trying to kind of fulfill this like caricature of who they think Thatcher was, but are failing to understand that actually Thatcher's strategy was, unfortunately for working class people in this country, a lot savvier than theirs, and really did break the union movement by dividing it. But when it comes to, again, this concept of the surprise, not so much the surprise, but understanding the relationship between this Conservative government and public sector workers, we again have to go back to this fundamental framework, which is that this government, the Conservative government, do not believe in the concept of a public sector. Institutions like the NHS, beloved institutions like the NHS, are a thorn in the side of this party. They didn't support the development of social housing or the NHS in its inception, and that grudge has continued today. If we look at someone like Jeremy Hunt, this is a man who is responsible for much of the problems that we are seeing in the NHS today. He was health secretary for 6 years between 2012 and 2018. And this was the period where really a huge amount of the damage that we are now suffering from in the NHS was done. When Hunt took over, I think it was about 95% or 94% of A&E patients were seen within the targeted 4 hours. By the time Hunt left his post, that fell to 84%, so 10 percentage points. Now it's 70% as a result of the cumulative impact of the changes that he introduced. Under Jeremy Hunt, we also saw targets around cancer referrals and waiting times, bed occupancy. All of these targets started to be routinely missed year upon year after having been fulfilled most of the time. So this is really when this kind of systemic expectation of failure in the NHS really began. It was during Hunt's tenure. And it's directly linked to what he did. You know, we see this steep fall in funding. Before Hunt, we saw funding in the NHS rising by about 6% every year. Under Hunt, that fell to 1%. We also saw the introduction of very nonsensical and medically illiterate restrictions on things like preventative screenings, which end up obviously costing the NHS more further down the line and putting pressure on the NHS further down the line, because when people have untreated health issues, those health issues become more complex and require more specialist knowledge and resources to effectively treat. Even when you go down to like the built infrastructure of the NHS, like the actual buildings and infrastructure that makes the NHS happen, the NHS has a £6 billion backlog in essential repairs and maintenance to the built infrastructure of the NHS. And the reason we have that backlog is because when Jeremy Hunt was ransacking those, the daily bills and the budgets, the NHS was having to turn to their maintenance budgets in order to kind of like cover up for the fact that their basic running costs were no longer being covered. So what I say all that to say, this is a man with nothing but contempt for the NHS. And he's shown that throughout his tenure. Many of the issues that we are suffering from right now is because of a policy and a logic that Jeremy Hunt introduced into our NHS. You know, let's not forget, during his tenure as health secretary, that's when we really started to see an escalation of privatization through the back door. Virgin Care won about £2 billion in contracts during his tenure. I say all this to basically get across that Jeremy Hunt doesn't believe that the NHS should exist as a socialized public health sector. He doesn't believe it should be a comprehensive thing that everyone uses, rich and poor. If anything, I think that the way that people like Jeremy Hunt see the future of the NHS is essentially very similar to what we see in the US, which is that those who can afford it rely on private health insurance, and everyone else uses the public health coverage, which is obviously of far lower quality because it's only used by working class people.